where I started the brand called Realme. From naming to building up a brand and making up about a $15 billion brand in less than 3.5 years. The value of the market is currently close to around 4.5 lakh crores in India, which is a 45 billion to $50 billion market. And out of which there's zero Indian brands, where 80% of industry currently is dominated by Chinese smartphone brands. The new age war would be not about any other bio wars, but it would be more about the data wars, which I see it. Leaving aside Apple, if you see on the Android ecosystem, one is Samsung and other is more of a BBK group who is covering most of a 60% of the market share. So BBK group involves which is Oppo, Vivo, OnePlus, Realme, and a few of the other IQ brands and everything. Indian brands never invested into R&D. Indian brands were not agile towards scaling up in the global markets. Indian brands never thought about R&D and designs into India.
Welcome to the Prime Venture Partners podcast. I am delighted to have with me today Madhav Sheth. He has been a luminary in the startup ecosystem around mobile phones and particularly was most famous as the CEO of Realme. Welcome to the show, Madhav.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. It's a pleasure having you over here. Thank you as well. Yeah.
Yeah, Madhav, as we were just talking before the podcast, it turns out that you and I know each other from many decades ago, and you are the son of one of our closest family friends. So it's actually even more privileged for me to be able to interview you on our podcast. So I'd love for you to talk to our listeners a little bit about your journey, into the corporate world and into being the CEO of various smartphone brands, not just including Realme, but your latest company as well. So why don't you take our listeners through your journey?
All right, so I think Amit, it's likewise, it's always an honor to meet someone whom we would have met about 2 decades ago, and is again good to meet up again. So definitely, it's always a pleasure to meet you and your family, and it's always had a great pleasure to be around them as well. So, anyways, coming back to my journey, yes, I've grown up in a very humble background. My dad being a banker and being having that strong value systems of finance, me being graduate under finance as well as into the management business, understanding the business nitty-gritties and understanding the ecosystem in India and having a tech expertise or having being a tech enthusiast was one of the key learnings, or I would say a key aspirations for me while I was growing up. And I have always been to the tech industry since the year 1998. And maybe I was in the service side where I was trying to sell the recharges for the mobile phones, where I was trying to sell feature phones. And I think it's been more than a two and a half decade. I am into the mobile industry from last two and a half decades. Gone across multiple brands with the brands on the distribution side, on the brand side. My main I think a key to success or where the people would be able to measure it up is where I started the brand called Realme. From naming to building up a brand and making up about a $15 billion brand in less than 3.5 years. That was my fame to success and where I left and back in 2023 to start something of my own in India because I probably felt there probably is time to build something for India where 80% of the industry currently is dominated by Chinese smartphone brand. The value of the market is currently close to around 4.5 lakh crores in India, which is around 45 billion to $50 billion market. And out of which there's zero Indian brands, or there's one Indian brand which is not even having 0% or is less than 0.5% of the market share. Huh. While 80% of the volume share in a 150 million handset market has been captured by Chinese smartphone brands, 20% is in terms of volumes is captured by Samsung and Apple. Uh, there's a huge market scope in India, and there's a huge digital divide in India because even in India, where I saw the white space was there was a huge divide from 2G to 5G, and there was a big space required because there are still we see that there are about 50 million users adding every year in 2G. While we are trying to bridge the digital divide, we say that we are getting into a digital economy. We will not be able to do it until unless the 50 million, which are also going to feature phone, moves to a smartphone. So if India wants to be a digital economy, I think that's a key responsibility for us to make sure that probably how can we do it. While all the global brands will always have a portfolio which is made according to their global standard markets. So India for them is more of a consumption market and rather than more of a market to develop and more of a market where they can, probably give uh, back something to the society in a way that they can bridge the digital divide gap. And that's where I feel the white space is and will always be continue doing it. So the market definitely is driven by the rapid technological advancements. But I think there's a technology shift and price affordability is very important in India market.
Yeah,
I think that was the reason I started back my journey back in 2023 to start up a new venture, which is Next Quantum Ownership.
absolutely. We'll definitely talk about next quantum and the AI plus smartphone. But maybe talk to us, since you've been doing this for almost 2 decades, right? How has the Indian consumer evolved and how has the market evolved, right? Just in terms of the smartphone, we all know that the geo and the data movement, right, starting 2013, 14, really lit the kind of Indian internet ecosystem on fire. But just how have the consumer preferences changed? What has become more popular back from the Nokia, 1111 days, 20 years ago or whatever it was back then. So just along the consumer journey, how have things evolved? How has the consumer?
Consumers, first of all, Amit, the most important thing what we need to understand is that India has got the youngest population in the world. We have got the youngest and the highest population of young people in the world, which means that we have the biggest millennial population. The average age in India is around 27 to 29. While in China the average is around 40, Japan the average is around 49. So the probably the most important thing what we really need to understand is that India being the youngest population in the world, what is more importantly required right now is that probably we have to make sure that probably the consumers are able to get the latest technology as and when it is required because the consumers would want or you can make or if you have to say it, the brands would like to make India as a yardstick. The reason because the consumers are the most demanding consumers in the world. And what does that mean is that probably they want best of the devices. They are value conscious. They are not price conscious, they are value conscious. At what price, particularly what product they would like to have it or to use it. So it is important for the brands to understand that being the young population, the aspirations from a product and the pricing is extremely important. So they are price conscious consumers, not, but probably they are more value conscious consumers. That's what a lot of global brands are not able to understand the Indian consumer side. Secondly, the technology, the field is ever evolving, ever growing. While we are moving towards 5G, and people have started using when we started using 3G, or when we started using 3G, people said, why do we need 4G? But until unless there are use cases, like we saw Uber, we saw Zomato's coming into picture of 4G and 5G, that's when people started realizing the need of 5G. So it's always the use cases that makes people to adopt the new technology. And more people after getting into OTTs and everything, the content getting towards the OTT, people want more of a digital device where they can consume the data. So data consumption is at peak in India. So talking about the consumers, India want to consume, they want to have their own private devices. Where they can consume the data, where they can watch their content accordingly. But at the same time, as I said, the consumer's journey has moved from just buying a device which was below 15,000 rupees in India, where 80% of the market used to be there, because of the affordability by the global brands, getting into easy availability of the loans. The consumers have moved to a higher price point. The ASPs, which is average selling price of any product, has increased. And only reason has because there were a lot of fintechs and a lot of I would say loans been available to even to the low credit score people in India, which made them probably connect to the digital world. But at the same time, I would see that probably the consumer trends are again moving on back to the devices which are more helpful towards it rather than having the affordability schemes and people are moving towards more lot of affordability schemes. But they're coming out of it again because of now the funds are not that easily available which used to be available a year ago.
So the question is, 10 years ago versus 5 years
Hmm.
ago versus now, have the price and value consciousness changed, the affordability, the age profile that one is serving, right? The 27 to 29-year-old. Was this the 18-year-old that has grown up on the smartphone era and therefore is now doing it? Or that was a different consumer then, now it's a different consumer?
Okay, so let me put it 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the average device users were 18 and above, or 20 years and above, or the early graduates and early office goers. 5 years ago, if I have to say, the adopters were around 18 years and 17 years also, which were just going to the colleges. The reason because people wanted to stay connected with their families, so every family started giving devices to their kids to ensure that during the COVID times also that they stay connected. Post that, we have seen that around that evolution of around COVID, people have got multiple devices because even the age group of 13 have got the mobile devices now. So in India, people would have multiple devices, including tablets, because that is where COVID took them into the phase where you have to move towards the digital education. And that is where I believe that a lot of changes have happened because of even the I would say geopolitical situation, or even the current economic situation, or you can say because of the health situation. But this is what it had changed over in the consumer's perspective. But apart from the age group, if I have to say on the affordability side, yes, consumers initially, when they were getting a device which was of 20,000 rupees 5 years ago, now they can get a better devices less than 15,000 rupees. So the consumers, as I said, they are more value conscious than the price conscious. What do I mean by it? That if they are a gaming user, let me put a very small example. If they want to use a BGMI gaming, which is like which needs 120 FPS, which is like at least frame per second. If they need that particular type of gaming, they used to get their devices earlier at around 20,000 or 25,000 rupees. Now they can even get it 10 to 15,000 rupees. So the consumers have now willing to buy 10 to 15,000 rupees device because they can easily fulfill what their aspiration was even in that 20 25,000 rupees devices. So the consumers are looking for the features rather than only prices. Is that device able to fulfill what they actually want to get out of their device or no? Is the battery life good enough for the whole day? Yes or no? Is the phone getting heating? Yes or no? All of these parameters are already been said. As I said, they're the young population. They are looking at five different things in the devices, and they will go with that same mindset. Whichever devices gives them that value at a particular price, that is the device they buy it. That's how it has changed and evolved.
Understood. Understood. So just like you cited the gaming example, are there any other obvious ones of profiles of what drives this kind of behavior?
Yeah, there are multiple. If you are playing a gaming, battery becomes very important. Cooling system becomes very important. Your chipset becomes very important. So battery life. If you are on your device for 2.5 hours continuously, you need a better battery devices. You need a better cooling chamber to ensure that the phone is not heated up. You need to make sure that probably the battery life is enough and is ensuring that probably it stays at least for about 8 to 10 hours uh, to ensure that you have a seamless experiences. It's all about now having that experiences which you need to fulfill it. Say, for example, if you are playing a live gaming, you need a better camera, you need a better multi-purpose devices and a multi-purpose chipset to perform that particular duty. So everything correlates to one output. It may be chipset, it may be camera, it may be battery, and it may be the features of your chipset, how you can bring it together along with the software to make sure that whatever the gamers are using or whatever the camera, like say for example, I'm going for the second function, which is camera. Even the camera centric users, they would need a better camera, and their aspirations from a camera would be closer to a digital photography. How can get a digital photography which requires a hardware and software calibration? What does that mean? A software calibration in the sense is you cannot achieve everything through a hardware. But what can AI algorithms along with the software can be done, which I always call a HNS, which is hardware and software put together to make sure they get closer to the digital photography with AI put into it to get a better result. So all of this, and on the back end, the hardware, how can the hardware support the same system?
Got it. Got it. Switching gears a little bit, but again, still keeping the timeline. There were dozens and dozens of brands, right? There were a bunch of Chinese brands. There's, of course, you mentioned Samsung and Apple that are some of the two of the winners. There were brands, that you led. There were brands like, Carbon and Lava and Micromax, etc. Can you talk more from a business point of view of who all made it and why, and without naming names or by naming names, who all got left by the wayside? Like what did those smartphone friends not do that let sort of got them to be kind of left behind or even disappear?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I see opportunity in this business is because I believe that this business is more of a monopoly duopoly market. Leaving aside Apple, if you see on the Android ecosystem, one is Samsung and other is more of a BBK group who is covering most of a 60% of the market share. So BBK group involves which is Oppo, Vivo, OnePlus, Realme, and a few of the other IQ brands and everything. So all of this put comes into one BBK group. But just putting up a different names and different brand names, they are capturing the market. But hence, I call it is more of a monopoly and a duopoly market. So when you are trying to do this, I see there's a lot of white space because they while they are trying to show that they are competing against each other, while at the outfront the consumers feel that there are too many brands are competing against each other. I always see on a value chain, they are trying to build up a common grounds on the economies of scale, building up a similar economies of scale and dividing under different back panels, which is a different brand name and putting it to the consumers. So hence I see as a more of a monopoly and a duopoly market where I believe there's a lot of scope in this particular business. Hence I said there's no Indian brands in 2014 if you see government opened FDI for all the Chinese brands to come into India with 100% FDI. While they were allowed to come into 100% FDI, I think they were not able to bring the ecosystems back to India, which was the purpose of bringing them to India. The ecosystem is about the component ecosystem. Ecosystem is about technology know-how. Ecosystem is about technology, manpower, technology know-how transfers. All of these ecosystems were never brought to India in last 10 years and decade. While this was supposed to be promised and given a roadmap to the government, but they have never fulfilled it over a period of time. It has been 10 years and they have never done it. At the same time, the Indian brands were not able to sustain beyond a particular point. The reason because we never thought in India we never thought of a design economy. We were always the first generation of all the brands who were there. We're all building up a brand which was more of a white labeling, bringing down from a China and just white labeling it, which is what right now I would say BBK Group is doing it, just white labeling one R&D and white labeling to all other brands. So I think if I have to say this in a very clear perspective, uh, Indian brands never invested into R&D. Indian brands were not agile towards scaling up in the global markets. Indian brands never thought about R&D and designs into India. Indian brands never thought about that probably what will it have to have that R&D center because it was always considered that as a cost center rather than as an investment center. And that is the reason I believe there were no Indian brands left into this particular ecosystem.
Got it. I'm very fascinated by this BBK group kind of analogy, and I'd love to know they have different brands, right? So that could be Oppo, which you worked at, Realme, Vivo, OnePlus, whatever. How do they themselves position these, or are these all independent companies that can do whatever they want in terms of both the consumer point of view and from a business point of view? How do they segment them?
See, honestly speaking, structurally, yes, they all circumvent to one particular, I think, company. But at the same time, they are all operating independently. But at the same time, as I said, they're all based out from Shenzhen and they have a common supply value ecosystems. While the supply value ecosystems will always make sure that probably they are not impacting each other. While if there's any new player trying to come down, the most important point, Amit, into this particular ecosystem is the supply chain, which becomes the fundamental of this. While the 80% of the supply chain is still controlled by China into this, any new player getting into this, the biggest threat for them is to have ensuring the supply chain has been secure. And the most important thing, when I say it's a monopoly or duopoly market, or when it's a BBK group, they know that they will be able to control the supply chain within their ecosystems. And while they can negotiate with the vendors in a way that probably they can control the ecosystem.
Yeah, Madhav, you didn't answer so I got that. The common supply chain, the economies of scale, the value benefit across this. I'm talking more from a consumer point of view. Why does a consumer pick, right, a Realme versus, a OnePlus versus Realme versus Vivo versus whatever? Because a lot of the challenge in consumer companies, I don't know about smartphones, is cost of customer acquisition also, right? I'm talking on the customer side, right? Consumer side. So are they, because you don't want to be like, and I have seen in the past, right? Huge, IPL sponsorship, this sponsorship, that sponsorship, whatever. So, like, how do you do the consumer part of this? The common backend, I understand that does make sense.
I would say the way they are tackling is to put different brands in a different channels. Like say for example, Oppo and Vivo have a series which is only for offline. They have their own online series also. So that's for a different series for a different set of consumers. Realme was predominantly when we launched was an online brand. Vivo has two series. One is Vivo also has another brand which is Ico. Ico is only mainly for Amazon. So I think it's more channel centric. Hence, I say it's a back panel change, psychology, where you change your channel, you change the back panel, and name it as a different brand. So at least you can position it as a different brand and do a separate GTM plan, and then position in the mind of a consumer because Amazon, like every store, has got its own set of customers. So one thing what they understand that probably if there's a different stores like online in India is like 50% of the market share in the mobile phone segment. While Amazon and Flipkart are like 99% or 95% of the business in e-commerce, doing their business in mobility. And if they're covering 50% of the market share, which is roughly around 70 million units have been sold between these two platforms. So there are two big retailers. And these two big retailers, they have their own set of consumers. So you just create a separate product for the consumers. While in offline also there's another 70 million consumers. So you create a separate series or separate name for it. And the way they are doing it is just create a separate marketing, separate GTM plans, and just having the similar product but just renaming it as a different series and a different name. Like even for Samsung, right, they're just having the same product like M, F, and A. There are the three different series. M would be for Amazon, F would be for Flipkart, and A would be for offline. Same product with a different name, different pricing for a different channel. That's it. So hence I call this as a back panel chain strategy, just to capture the market to in a way that probably you're trying to capture the biggest retailers across and their consumers in a different name. So this is how I see the brands doing it like that.
Understood. Maybe now this is a good time to segue into the company that you're building, right? And I think the product is going to be called AI Plus Smartphone. But talk to us a little bit about, where are you going to differentiate, whether it's on R&D, on supply chain, on, go to market, whatever, right? How are you thinking about it for yourself?
Very good question, Amit. I'll like to answer it in a different way. While all the brands in India, they are waiting for the compliance to happen to make sure that probably the government uh, puts up some norms, and that's when they start following it up. The most important thing which I have seen and which is very important right now, it becomes a fundamental critical factor that the data security has become one of the major concern across. While none of them will be bothered about it because none of them are part of an Indian ecosystem and their data are going left, right, and center. The new age war would be not about any other bio wars, but it would be more about the data wars, which I see it, right? So what I thought that if you don't owe the OS or don't owe the cloud or don't owe the cloud or the rules of it, we don't owe the phone. And if your phone in your hand is your bank, is your ID, and is your classroom. And most of it runs on the system which we don't control. And this is one of the biggest problems. I also figured out when we are building up this next quantum that India's self digital reliance on foreign infrastructure is the biggest disconnect which we need to fix. So when we started doing all of these things and we started putting up the questions on the board, it was not just in hardware. It also about that how can I help the ecosystem to build something in India and make sure that probably the data of the consumers are stored in India. So that comes the three fundamental pillars. Point number one, how can I have the democratization of a digital divide gap, which means that how can I bring more affordable smartphones where this 2G users or 4G users can bridge the gap to the 5G users. That's point number one, which means is a democratization of hardware. Point number two, how can I bring transparency on the data front? And third is the privacy. So point number one was so supposed to be achieved through hardware. Point number two, which is on the transparency and on the privacy, to achieve through the software. So we build our own ground up software, which is based on Android, but at the same time we build up Next Quantum OS, where we said that the first thing what we want to do is to educate the consumers through transparency. And what does that transparency mean is to put up a very small feature is we have patented our Next Quantum dashboard on our phone, which means you will be able to understand which app is using what type of hardware on your phone to collect the data, which means there is any a particular app or any food delivery app or any other app or messaging app is collecting your pictures, collecting your camera pictures, camera profile, is collecting your messages data, is collecting your X number of other things, six type of different things. So we figured out that there are about 30 type of telemetric data which are not required by the app to collect it. And that 30 types of telemetric data is, if the apps are collecting and what is the purpose behind it. While we do not have in India the DPDP Act as of now, which has been still been implemented, how can we bring that into force before even the government puts as a act? How can industry take the initiative? But the industry in India, when I figured out the industry will never take initiative, the reason because none of the industry Indian players are there. So why would they bloody bothered about taking any initiative? That was the whole reason, I thought we should be making sure that probably there's a value system attached to the company when we are trying to build this up from ground. That's
No, makes sense. Makes a lot of sense, right? In terms of the democratization of the hardware, the transparency, and so forth. Do you think Indian consumers are becoming more savvy about their privacy and about their data? Forget the act itself of DPDP, which of course the government is pushing, and correctly so, right? But do you think that Indian consumers are becoming more aware, especially in the broader market? I'm sure a tier one South Mumbai customer may be more aware, but in the larger market,
Honestly speaking, none of the consumers are interested or bothered about the data where it is going out, right? But because the only biggest concern, or I would say the problem with the mindset what we have, is we'll figure out once we have a problem. So that is the only biggest challenge we have. We always understand after we have burned our fingers, right? And we learn to burn our fingers, and then only we understand a particular concept. So the whole point is, um, point number one, the consumers, lot of in tier two and tier three towns have understood this better than the South Bombay ones or the metro ones. There's a reason behind it. I would say there were Chinese fintech companies who have given soft loans to a lot of auto rickshaw drivers, taxi drivers, and everything. And if you have heard about back in 2021, there were more than 40, 50 apps were banned in India. They were all Chinese. There was a reason behind it. There were all these Chinese fintech apps which were banned. The purpose of it was because they used to give the consumer loans, and once the loans were not repaid, the way to collect it was very unethical, which was taking away all their mobile access data or private phones, numbers, pictures, everything, and share it to on a WhatsApp group to all the family friends, which may be a personal picture, everything. So there were a lot of suicide cases, a lot of things that happened in the past, and that's the reason the Chinese have were not allowed to enter into the Indian ecosystem of finance and every other aspects of it. So this was the risk, and a lot of small town people and when the suicides happened, a lot of people were extremely, I would say, in a situation that they were not able to repay it, and they had to literally go for nothing else but suicide because they were also embarrassed in front of their families and their friends and everything. So there was nothing left for them, which led to a point that probably yes, this type of things becomes extremely relevant and important for a lot of people. But as I said, it is important for the industry people to make sure that education to this type of consumers, every set of consumers are important. There was a survey back in 2021. What would you choose, convenience over privacy or privacy over convenience? People will always choose convenience over privacy rather than privacy over convenience, because for them the ease of use is more important. So learning from this particular service and understanding from what has happened in the consumers. The first thing what I said that I cannot compromise on the convenience of the user, right? Because if I try to compromise on the convenience of the user, which is their belief system, then probably consumers will not be able to connect with the brand. So without compromising on convenience, how can I ensure on the background the privacy is always also been educated and been maintained. So I think that was the most important fundamental thing what we started working on it. And while we were doing it, as I said, the privacy and education of privacy is extremely important for the consumers. We mentioned that the convenience of having an Android ecosystem and having the AI Android ecosystem should not be going out. That's it.
makes sense. So great, Madhav. As we bring this to a close here, any thoughts as you look to the future over the next, call it 5 years, right? How do you think the role of AI will play into this? What other innovations do you think will potentially happen? And any thoughts in terms of your crystal ball gazing into the Indian consumer 5 years hence, 2030?
I'll say on two different aspects, Amit. One is on the business side and one is on the consumer side. Business side, India is a land of opportunity at this point of time because way the sanctions and the geopolitical situations are shaping up. India itself is a consumption market. India is a huge consumption market of more than 1.5 billion people, while the rest are still about 35-40% of the people not connected to the digital ecosystem. So it's a huge digital divide gap which still needs to be fulfilled. So there's a huge potential in India itself as as a consumption market. Point number one. Point number two, on the consumer front, they would need the latest innovations on AI. While we are talking about AI, AI should never be used as a marketing jargon. While what I believe that AI would be something which would be embedded in the smartphones more efficiently over a period of time, where the real use cases will come down when the people will start feeling it as more convenient rather than having it anything else. So it is more important for the people to understand that the convenience of using an AI is something what they should start experiencing it. The only biggest concern in India, which I see, is when they start experiencing it in a mass of AI. At that point of time, will they be able to pay the subscription fees? Yes or no? That's the question which I still have in my mind. That's point number one. Because AI, while we are trying to say we are trying to democratize it, the cost of subscription in the near future, how will it be able to go further down to the masses? And will they be able to afford it and will they be able to do it? Because India has always been a market of free. Will they be able to go for subscription-based model? Yes or no? I'm talking about mass markets. That's point number one, which the trend which I had still have to figure it out. Are we trying to only tackle about 1% of the mass market or 1% of the market in India who are willing to pay the subscription fee? Or we are trying to tackle to the 99% of the market which are willing to use it for free? Will you be able to use it and go forward from there? So that's point number two. Point number three, on the Indian LLM ecosystem, I believe that there's a huge scope that probably we can also build over it and we can get embedded into our smartphone because the most important thing what we see is India does not have a hardware ecosystem, hence there was software ecosystem was also lacking. But while I see that all the world softwares were developed by great Indians across the world, there is a huge potential in India being the youngest population and being the tech savvy population, we have a huge potential to build hardware and software into India. So next 5 years, I see that India has a huge potential to build itself on ground up. We need to make sure that probably the policies what we are going through are more favoring to the Indian ecosystems and Indian education ecosystems where they're able to get more bandwidth to portray their outcomes on a larger scale. That's how.
Well, fantastic, Madhav. Thank you. Thank you so much for being on the Prime Venture Partners podcast.
Dear listeners, thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast app for free, and you'll be the first one to know when new episodes are available. Just search for Prime Venture Partners podcast in Apple Podcast, Spotify, Castbox, or however you get your podcasts. Then hit subscribe. And if you have enjoyed the show, we would be really grateful if you leave us a review on Apple Podcast. To read the full transcript, find the link in the show notes.